Welcome to The Exchange. I'm Dan Riley. The Exchange is a streaming internet talk show and podcast of interviews with noteworthy people about their lives, ideas, and current events. This week I sit down with Nobel laureate and Florida State University chemistry professor Sir Harold Kroto. In our wide-ranging conversation, Harry talks about his professional interests, his life both inside and outside of academia, and the discovery that would eventually win him the 1996 Nobel Prize in chemistry. Dr. Kroto, I'd like to start just by kind of learning a little bit about your academic background. How did you initially get interested in science back in the day?
I don't know that I was ever interested in science. Yeah. I just was interested in everything, and nothing was particularly less or more interesting than anything else. And as far as I'm concerned, I was interested in art and playing sport and how things worked. And I didn't think about anything called science. I didn't even think I was going to be a scientist. I just was better at scientific subjects at school, and art and history and geography, but not that great at languages. I didn't like languages very much. My parents were from Germany, and up in Bolton in Lancashire, you just wanted to be English after the war. So I didn't find it very interesting because languages are just a communications medium, and I could already communicate in English, and there was no one around who spoke French or German, so it didn't seem very useful. Of course, it is useful when you travel, but I wasn't traveling when I was 7 or 8 years old after the war. So I got better and better, I suppose. I was never top of the form, but I was close to it in most things. And my father insisted that my science and maths homework was number one, and other things came high, but not as important to him. He was a refugee, and he realized, quite rightly, I suppose, that I had a better statistical chance of getting a job, which is the important thing, if I had good science and maths. So that's how I ended up doing that at university, chemistry. But at university, I felt that I wanted to do many things. I felt the same at school, so I made myself a good tennis player. I don't think I'm a natural sportsman, but some people just, they seem to do everything quite easily. So I made myself a good tennis player, and and I made myself whatever I am. And
of all the science subjects out there, you had the most aptitude for chemistry.
Well, I think so. Yes, I mean obviously that, but I also had a teacher who I empathized with in chemistry, a guy called Harry Heaney, who became a professor at the university later on. He was only at the school a couple of years, I think, and then went back into academia, and he gave me extra advice, I think, on chemistry and things. He'd done things as a PhD student, which interested me in chemistry, organic chemistry. And then I also had extra lessons in art from the art teacher, a guy called Mr. Higginson. And when I went to university, I played tennis for the university, and I was art editor for the student magazine, and I got involved with student politics and became president of athletics council at university. But I also worked pretty hard on my chemistry and science, and then did a PhD. And so I felt university was not just a learning experience in chemistry. For me, it was an all-round experience, and when people talk about the internet and a revolution in education, I think, yes, it is for those who can't go to university, but for those who can, the university is a life-changing experience, and is a stepping stone from school to developing responsibility and exploring other avenues of your potential creativity. To I guess getting a job where you no longer have such easy open access to many things, and I think people should be aware of that. This is a revolution, but I think universities are very important cultural experience of meeting other people and peers, and not just in your own subject, but in a wide range of subjects. Because my friends are in we're in journalism, in dentistry, in architecture, and sport, and things like this.
Talk about the bulk of your academic career after you got your PhD and the sort of work that you did and the first 10, 20, 30 years after you started actually becoming a professor and working in chemistry.
Well, I didn't know whether I'm going to be any good at it. I mean, I don't think I have any special aptitude for science. I don't necessarily think I'm any special aptitude for anything other than I work hard, and I have worked hard, although it's getting more difficult as you get to my age to get over these real energy we required to work as hard as I do and Margaret does, my wife. And so I think I just put my effort into what I was doing. I never put in a second-rate effort. If I was going to do something, I just did it to the best of my ability, which I always recognized was not necessarily as good as some other people, or as able in mathematics, or as able in chemistry, or as able in tennis, or as able in graphics. But somehow that determination not to put in a second-rate job is more important than one's ability, one's apparent ability, whatever that is. So we went to Canada I did a postdoc in Canada for 2 years, and then I went to Bell Labs I was at the National Research Council, which was the mecca of my subjects, molecular spectroscopy. Then I went to Bell Labs for a year, and then I was asked to consider coming back to the UK to do research and teach at University of Sussex, which I went back to. And then I thought, well, I'll give it 5 years. If it doesn't work, I'll probably go and do graphics or something which I really felt not so much more comfortable. I was more in control, because whatever you do is you've done it. Whereas in science, if the universe doesn't play ball, then the universe is in charge of science, and you're in charge of whatever you do. The actual techniques are the same. I mean, you've got to be proficient at this. You've got to know your materials. In science, you've got to know how to do experiments and this sort of thing. But at the end of the day, there's one major difference. And it's not in the technical areas, it's not in the doing areas. It's the fact that when you've created something, it's yours. And it doesn't matter whether someone thinks it's good or not. And that's another matter. But with science, it's the way the universe is, and you've got to bend over backwards not to see what you want to see and not what's there. And in science, that's a very important factor for me, because in all other areas, you're in control, and it's what you think. It's not what is actually true or what are false. And so, for me, science gives me a sort of ethical basis, in the sense that you do a work and you find out the way the universe works, and very often it doesn't work the way you would hoped it would, or you thought it would, or you would want it to, and that gives you a very different attitude to life from other people who do something and say, well, this is good, when other people might think it's crap, I mean, so but it doesn't matter, because you've created it.
It'd be difficult to talk about your career generally without talking about the prize that would end up defining
it's
some of your life.
It's very easy for me to talk about that, because I didn't go into science it was a job. Yeah. I was off. I went in and was tenured almost immediately, which was the situation then. And then I thought, well, I'll give it 5 years. If I'm no good at research, then I'll get out of it and do graphics, because I knew I could do. I'd done quite a lot of this. I'd won my first award for my graphic design when I was a student, and people had asked me to do posters and stuff like this, and I knew I could do this, and I felt I could make a living out of it by then, which I didn't know 10 years earlier. So I fell into this chemistry because I was asked to come back to a postdoc, and then was tenured almost immediately. I thought, I'll give it 5 years, and if it doesn't work, I'll get out. Well, after 5 years, it's starting to motor a little bit, and it took 7 years, really, and I actually enjoyed teaching, and occasionally students quite enjoyed me teaching. Not all of them, because students are very different and are motivated by different types of teacher. I mean, this thing, good teacher, it depends actually on a teacher-student relationship. And some teachers that other people thought were bad, I thought were great. I didn't want any histrionics. I just wanted to know this sort of thing. So it's very much more dependent, it seems to me, on whether the student wants to teach themselves. So that went on, and I had some success, and then another guy had an award, and I thought, well, my stuff looks better than him. Why didn't I have an award? Well, so a little bit later, I got a little award from chemistry. So I did some nice work on phosphorus and sulfur chemistry, and then I got another breakthrough, which is in radio astronomy. Some of the work that I was doing in the lab produced some radio frequencies which could be used by radio astronomers to detect molecules in space. And we detected them, and there were carbon molecules in space. And this was quite a breakthrough. And so that was number 2. So I was 2 strikes, right? So I was really pleased. And I thought, well, I was now a professor, and I was thinking it'd be nice to have 3. I mean, I guess the round number is always 1 more than it was before. So 2, when it was 1, that was great. I'd like to another 1 too. And then really out of the blue, just visiting Rice University, a friend, Bob Curl, I went to see, he said yesterday, go see Rick Smalley, who was doing some nice work on cluster science. And I went, and as Rick was describing what he was doing in the apparatus, and he was a very sort of effusive character, I hatched a very simple thought in my mind, which had been there, but it sort of formed as I was watching what he was doing. I thought, well, here's this problem of how these carbon molecules actually came to be in the interstellar medium between stars. Maybe this method of vaporizing, which is vaporizing metals and silicon, could vaporize carbon and simulate the conditions in a carbon star. That was all. I mean, I knew it would work. I mean, I was no qualms about it. This was a simple experiment. Just try and do it, and just show 1 or 2 of my friends who were thinking of different ways that this was one way in which these molecules could actually occur. And that about 17 months later, I got a phone call from Bob saying that we're going to do this experiment. Are you coming, or should we send you the data? Well, here I made a major decision. I got on a plane in 2 days and went there. And a part of the reason, of course, well, not of course, was that there's a really good half-price bookstore in Houston. And so not only could I do this very quite, not saying mundane experiment, but very simple, straightforward experiment, which I knew would work because there were a beautiful paper in 1960 by a German group who'd actually more or less done this experiment, but had not really had the technology that we now had to do this. And so I went and lo and behold, out came this incredible result that there was something else there. The experiment worked exactly as I expected, but there was something else. Quite well, it was a longer story than this, but anyway, it was the C60 molecule, buckyball, Buckminster Fullerian. I called it after Buckminster Fuller because when we got this signal, we were thinking what could explain why this thing was so strong, such a strong, stable signal. And I'd been to Expo in 1967 in Montreal, and Buckminster Fuller's dome had made a great impression on me. Sufficiently large impression that I even thought of going to work with him. Sorry, there's a frog in my throat. And in fact, I think I came out of the library with Buckminster Fuller's address where his research was being carried out. At the same time as I walked out, I think I was offered a job at the University of Sussex, so I didn't actually go. I was going to write to him, and I never wrote that letter, unfortunately. It would have been nice to have had that letter many years later, 1966, 1985, so nearly 20 years later. No, it's 1967. Anyway, so we made this big discovery, and it was total serendipity, and it led to the Nobel Prize. And I never went in for prizes. I don't think about doing things. I don't think about doing things important. I never thought about the prize. After we made the discovery, then, of course, people were saying, this is a big one, a big discovery. And I realized it was a big discovery. But it wasn't immediate, because after 1985 to 1990, several papers said we were wrong in what we claimed. And I felt, well, initially I thought it was obviously correct. But after a few papers saying, this is not right, I looked at them. I knew their arguments were wrong, but I thought could we be wrong? And it bothered me a bit. And during that period, I remember very soon after saying, well, I'd like to prove we're right, but if we're wrong, I really want to prove that I want to do that. I want to show that I don't want someone else to shove it up my nose. So I felt very strongly about that. And I set off on a 5-year campaign to try and get the evidence that we were right. And in fact, I worked with the Rice Group, and the Rice Group worked independently, and we worked independently at Sussex. There were 3 efforts, and all of these started to build up very strong, compelling sort of circumstantial evidence that we were right. And then I developed what I call my 4 out of 5 rule, which was if you have an observation, make an observation, you must sort of develop 4 or 5 would be good, further experiments to find evidence that you're correct. And if 4 out of 5 fit, you're almost almost certainly right. And if 4 out of 5 don't fit, you're almost certainly wrong. And if you do some sort of fairly standard statistical analysis of this, you come to the conclusion that if 4 out of 5 fit, as they did, in fact 5 out of 5 fitted, if 4 out of 5 fitted, then you're at 99.9 or 9% probability that the one that doesn't fit, you need to go back to that and check you're doing the right experiment. And then after 5 years, it was proven to be correct. And so that was the story. And then, if people want to give me a Nobel Prize, I'm not going to turn it down. But it's an odd prize. All prizes are not fair, and the Nobel Prize in some ways I think it's a better prize than others. I think it's better research than others. I've been on other prizes I don't think as much effort goes into it. But at the end of the day, for everybody who gets it, there are another 10, 20, 50 people who are so close. And because the Nobel Prize is the one that, certainly within the sciences, is more known than any others, it has this overriding value because people don't know many other prizes. The curious thing, of course, is I get some people saying that I'm sure others do. I got the Nobel Peace Prize for chemistry, and so when you get that from someone who's supposed to be a scientist, it's really a bit.
Well, we're almost out of time, but I would ask, I guess the 2 final questions I would want to know is, how did that prize affect your life and your career afterwards? And second, what advice would you have for young people who are considering a career in science? The advice I'll give you first, because as far as I'm concerned, it's not just considering life in science. I think the advice is, for anybody, is never put in a second-rate effort. If you're doing something second-rate, try and find something else to do where only your best shot will satisfy you personally. And don't do it for the teacher or for whoever's up there. It's for you personally, that you feel, that's the best job you can do. Someone else could do it better, but they're not as passionate about this particular thing. And I think that's why I'm here. It's not because I'm particularly smart or particularly good at this. I know my limitations, and I've met some fantastic scientists, and I just think, wow, these are geniuses, but they don't have Nobel Prizes. And the Nobel Prize is not something to go for. I never went for prizes, and if I
gone for prizes, I thought, I've got to do something important, and nothing I ever did seemed important until afterwards, and that's what science is. The really important things are things that don't appear important ahead of time, or they're just your own personal interest, and something surprising comes out, and that surprise comes later, and the value comes later. A good example is the laser. You could never predict that you could never invent a laser for eye surgery. I mean, the eye surgeons would never do this. People who are interested in cash registers and in the supermarket are never going to invent the laser, right? So the laser is the product of often a certain individual's imagination, perhaps working with a team. So I don't go for that sort of science. I go for what I'm interested in. And what was the other question?
How did the prize affect your life and your career?
Well, I mean, I was always giving a lot of lectures. I mean, once I was doing radio astronomy. Astronomy is a very good hook. I mean, astronomers have, well, not an astronomer, but astronomy seems to grab the attention of people, I think unfairly, because I don't think it gives as much to society as some chemistry does and some physics does. But it's what's out there, and so there's these beautiful pictures from NASA, and so I'm not saying I'm jealous, but I just think the astrophysics, and particularly cosmology, which is second only to religion in many cases, gets far too much popular press, and I think this is not necessarily good. So you find that that gets an inside track to people's imagination, and they think that's the only useful science or valuable science, when it isn't. So when I did radio astronomy, now I got a lot more invitations to give talks, and so it's a very good hook to teach. And so I used to teach astrophysical chemistry. It was a very good hook to teach real chemistry. And then when the Nobel Prize comes along, of course, there are lots more invitations. But I already had a lot of invitations. I had more invitations than I needed before. I didn't need any more. So I get far too many. And I think it didn't change my life as much. But it did mean I did more presentations on the road. And certainly in Asia and China and India, kids come out in droves to listen to a Nobel Prize winner, and they're very charming and they listen very attentively. And I think the West has got a problem facing, because the kids over there really do want to do science, and there's a large numbers of them. It's a market share issue, and there are a lot more in China than there are in the States who really see science and engineering and technology as a way of getting out of the poverty and making a living. And I think the West still should wake up and realize that they're going to be taken over. I mean, we're seeing now already very good papers out of China. 10 years ago, I never looked at a Chinese paper. Never. Now they're coming.
Well, Harry, thank you so much for coming on the show
No
today.
problem.
Thanks for listening. If you're interested in learning more about the Exchange, want to listen to episodes online, or would like to reach out to the show, feel free to visit the show's website at theexchangeshow.com.